Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Cordant and today in this video we will be going over the character builds for my main character as well as my core party members during my first playthrough of Rogue Trader on Unfair. So we're gonna be talking about each build for each of the characters, level up decisions, the itemization, gear that they had, and we are also going to be discussing their role in the party and the overall game plan strategy. Because there's not much point, in my opinion, of discussing a character build if we don't explain how exactly they are supposed to play, what their role is, and how the entire party synergizes between themselves in order to achieve our game plan. I do want to mention something right now, before we begin, which is, from the time that I finished my playthrough, up to the point that I'm now recording this video today, some time has passed. And I started my playthrough on the channel on the release day, and if you know, or if you are not aware, the game had a lot of bugs early on. So it did receive a significant amount of patches as time went on. Some of these patches are minimal, other of these patches will significantly change the way that certain features or abilities work, which might make some of these builds change a little bit. I don't believe they would change it to a point where a build is broken, but just keep in mind that some of the powerful things I used during my playthrough may no longer work the same way. So as we go through the characters, if I notice something different, I will mention that and I will, give my opinion if I would still take it or if I wouldn't take it or take it later, something like that. Also, to not make this video go on way too long, because there are 6 characters to talk about, I am going to be breaking this down into separate videos. Possibly like one video per character, just so I can, I have time to discuss the build without being worried about making it a video that's too long. Okay, so to begin, I think the most important thing to discuss first is the game plan that I used, my strategy, as I went throughout the game to defeat our opponents. And I will say that for the first part of the game, where you pretty much only have a single archetype, I played it pretty much as a typical turn-based CRPG. Okay, nothing too fancy. I wanted to have a party with a sturdy frontline, somebody that would take the attention of the enemies, protect my backline, while also dishing out some melee damage and being very defensive. And for that purpose, I mostly used Abelard and to a certain degree Pascal as well, although he is a little bit more squishy. I had powerful damaging characters, in this case Argenta by shooting her weapons, and also Idira with very powerful spellcasting. And finally, I also had some very, very good support characters in the form of my main character, because I picked an officer for him, and also Cassia, which is also an officer. So I would say a pretty standard and balanced party for the early game, nothing too fancy in the way I approached my combat encounters. However, once we start going into our second archetype, I think things change dramatically. And my game plan kind of switched a bit from the typical approach to a turn-based game to just not even giving my enemies a chance to play. And that, once we started being able to do that, that was the game plan from that point until the end of the game. And when I say not giving my enemies a chance, I mean it literally. The enemies did not even get around to act. They would all die on turn 1. And the way we get this going is we kind of build a snowball effect, right? We start getting our gears working and we're gonna just go up and up and up, make a larger and larger snowball and just kill everything before they can even do anything. And what makes this work is, in Rogue Trader, like in most turn-based games, you will have some kind of an initiative role. So you decide who plays first in a combat encounter. However, in this game, you have several ways to manipulate that order. So for example, the Grand Strategist archetype, this will make sure that if you have this archetype, you will always play first. You will play before your friends, you will play before all of the enemies. And in a turn-based game, if you can manipulate initiative in your favor and get to act first, that is already a massive boost for your characters. It's going to be tremendously helpful. And especially when you couple this with an officer, it just gets even better. Because you guarantee that you act first. With the officer, you can give people extra turns. So not only do you act first, you can also decide who goes after by using Bring It Down. If you have this on somebody like Cassia, it just gets even sillier, because Cassia not only has the abilities of her archetype of the officer, which can already, give extra turns as well as buff your party, you also have the Navigator origin, which also allows you to have a lot of different buffs for the entire party. So the plan basically is, we get to act first, we pick up Cassia, right? She's my grand strategist. She acts first. I am going to use her action points at the start, which are a lot because of some talents we pick, to buff the entire party and generate some momentum, because that's also a very important mechanic here. And once we have thoroughly buffed our entire party, we are going to Bring It Down to another character in our party. And the person I choose is the person that I see myself as being able to generate the most momentum with. So momentum is a mechanic in this game where when you kill your enemies and when certain interactions happen or certain actions are taken, you generate a certain amount of momentum. Once you reach a threshold or a high amount of momentum, you gain access to an heroic act. The heroic act is like a ultimate ability you can only use once per combat per character. And those abilities are very, very powerful. So, the plan is, again, act first, buff up a lot of people, generate momentum through a lot of various abilities that we can have, give an extra turn to somebody else that can also generate a lot of momentum, and ideally also, buff the party or maybe just damage some enemies right away. Get momentum enough to obtain an heroic act, and then once you get an heroic act, you are basically chaining them together until everything is dead. So an example would be, I would buff up my party, generate momentum with Cassia. I would Bring It Down to, for example, Idira or Argenta. They would in turn generate a lot of momentum, trigger an heroic act, and then if I can see that with that heroic act, I can generate even more momentum to get another one, if so, I will use the heroic act of that person, kill a bunch of enemies, trigger another heroic act, pass the turn, back to Cassia, and then use Cassia's heroic act, which, guess what, also gives an extra turn to somebody else with full AP and MP, and then that person can murder a bunch of enemies, trigger an heroic act, and you can see how this, just keeps on going until everything is dead and they can't even act. So, with that general idea of how the game plan is, let's start by discussing, I guess, the first piece of the puzzle, which is going to be Cassia. Cassia, story companion, very powerful story companion. I would say that out of all of my companions in the game, even the ones that aren't here, Cassia is likely the most powerful one. I don't think I could do a main character as powerful as her for her role, because she has the Navigator origin, which nobody else has. And the Navigator origin gives us access to a lot of very, very powerful buffs. A lot of very powerful spells and abilities, because it's not only buffs. She can buff, she can debuff, she can damage the opponents, she can stun them, she can manipulate their movement, get them out of cover, she can do a lot of things. She is an insane support character. I don't see myself playing this game again without taking Cassia with me. She is that good. She starts with the officer. I then gave her Grand Strategist, and then everybody has Exemplar. overall, the role of Cassia is mostly a support character. So from her archetypes, I am mostly taking support features. So something to give extra turns, something to benefit my allies. In some way, abilities to also debuff the opponents, but from the archetypes, it's mostly a support role. So the Officer, Grand Strategist, and Exemplar are mostly support features that I take. Then, from the Navigator side of things, is when it gets very, very interesting. Because from the Navigator talents, we can get, again, a lot of support through buffs. We can get a lot of disabling effects for the enemies, like debuffs. You can make them weaker. You can lower their resistances. More importantly than any of those, in my opinion, you can manipulate their movement. You can take them out of cover. You can clump them up in a large pile to then AoE them down. Cassia can just do everything, basically. She's tremendously good. Not only that, she also has access to some very damaging abilities. So she can also deal a lot of very decent damage. But yeah, the role of Cassia is backline character, support my party, disable the enemies, mess with them by messing up their movement, and at times also dish out some damage. It can also be seen here by the characteristics that this is mostly based on spellcasting and abilities, because we are not going to be using weapons. Our weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, agility, none of this matters for Cassia because it's everything based on spells. So, with the role settled, let's then look at the level up process here. So, the Officer archetype, you start with this. You start with Voice of Command, a very, very important buff for the Officer. This will give your allies some buffs, and also very importantly, if the ally is under the effect of Voice of Command, you can buff them or affect them with your abilities from anywhere you are on the map, which can be very, very handy. As for skill checks, I'm not going to be going into too much detail on this because you can kind of pick whatever you want. She starts with Persuasion because she has a high amount of Fellowship. This is just to pass skill tests. As long as you make sure your party is capable of dealing with most of them, you're fine. You don't have to, follow a guide for that, I would say. Bring it down. One of the very core features of the Officer. You can give an ally an extra turn with 2 AP and no MP. However, we do have ways, through other abilities and other feats, to increase the amount of AP and MP that you are able to give. So this can be a whole lot better than it seems right here. And just by itself, it's already quite good. And if the ally is under the effect of Voice of Command, and they kill an enemy before the end of the Officer's turn, the ally gains a one-time additional momentum. So already we're seeing some momentum generation out of our Bring It Down ability here. Then, moving on to Finest Tower, like I showed before, this is the heroic act of the Officers. In my opinion, this is one of, if not the best heroic act you can get in the game. The Officer grants an ally an extra turn with full AP and MP, and during the extra turn there is no attack limit. You get to a point where you can generate so much AP that no attack limit on an extra turn just means that there will be no enemies left. Everything will die. It is very, very powerful. Even if you don't use it to attack somebody, you can use it to set up a whole bunch of different things. You can just set up the movement for one of your companions, get them into cover. You can use them to buff your allies. You can use them to disable your opponents. Just, extra turn is always going to be very, very good. Something I also want to mention here when we're talking about AP and MP, one of the most important things in any turn-based game, and Rogue Trade is no exception, is action economy. When I talk about action economy, I am discussing being as efficient as possible with your resources. So you want to be very efficient with your AP, your action points, and also your MP, your movement points, to get the most out of them. So any talent or ability that gives you extra action points, extra movement points, extra attacks, extra actions, they will always be very, very important to obtain. So, I think she also comes with Inspired Courage. Whenever you buff an ally for the first time, you give them some temporary wounds. Cool. When you get a chance to pick a characteristic, I always go for Willpower if I have the chance. This is because most of Cassia's abilities are empowered and scale with Willpower. So the more Willpower you have, the better Cassia will be in all of her roles. We also take Mind over Matter. The Navigator makes all resistance tests with their Willpower if it is higher than the base characteristic for such a test. So we are going to have a lot of Willpower. This just means that our resistance tests are going to be very, very difficult to go through. And not only that, if the Navigator's Willpower is higher than their Toughness, which it will be, the Navigator's wounds are calculated according to their Willpower. So if we see here, Cassia is the character with the most wounds, because wounds are hit points in this game. 227. The next highest one is Abelard with 177. So significant difference just because of Mind over Matter. Very good defensive ability, very nice to have. On rank 6, Lasting Impression. This was nerfed. I want to make this clear. What this does is, half of the bonus granted by Voice of Command remains until the end of combat, because typically it only lasts, I think, like a round. Does not cycle with itself or with bonuses granted by Voice of Command, but does count as an officer ability effect for the purposes of other talent effects. Note, the target of Lasting Impression does not count as having the Voice of Command effect. They only gain bonuses to their characteristics. This is the nerf. Because what you could do before, and I did, which was very, very nice, if you remember, Voice of Command not only buffs you up, but it allows you to apply your abilities to that character, that ally, from any distance. And if you had Lasting Impression, for the rest of the combat, you could just buff that ally or give him whatever you want from whatever distance you are at, because they were always under the effect of Voice of Command. It is no longer the case. So, I think it's still good to keep half of the bonuses. It's just not as impressive as it was before, because I think the main aspect of this talent here was to be able to give them abilities from any range. Again, more Willpower, we want this as high as possible. Rank 7, Reveal the Light. So we could have taken an officer ability here, but I took Reveal the Light. I think Reveal the Light is one of the best buffs in the game. The target ally gains 34. This is based on your Willpower. Again, you want to get Willpower as much as possible, as high as possible. Gains 34 to their Willpower and Toughness until the end of combat. So this is already quite good, but we have ways to increase the Willpower on Cassia. So the more you can buff your Willpower before casting this, all the better. This was also nerfed. There were a lot of nerfs in this game. Because before, you could apply Reveal the Light to any character, even Cassia. Now, you can only buff your allies. So, one thing I would typically do was, I would get my first turn, and the first thing I would do was buff Cassia with Reveal the Light, because it would improve everything else you would do for the rest of the game, or the rest of the combat. No longer the case, so it is a nerf in some way, but it is still very, very powerful, so I would still always take this. And it can benefit most people in your party, because you can benefit someone like Idira with Willpower, which is very good, and getting extra Toughness is never bad either. That just means you get more hit points. Guide of Souls. The Navigator starts all turns, including extra turns, with 3 additional movement points. So we're going back to when I talked about action economy. The first ally targeted by Navigator with a single target ability each turn gains the same amount of additional movement points at the start of their next turn. So you get more movement points, you give your allies more movement points, action economy all over the place. Perfect. Decisive Response. Whenever you use Voice of Command or bring it down the first time in combat, this ability costs 1 AP less. I mean, action economy again. If things cost less, you have more AP to use during combat. Very, very good. I took Awareness just as a skill check Again, I'm not going to go too much into detail over these. I will just skip through them. For my heroic act, I started with Finest Hour Upgrade 4. The target of Finest Hour gains more bonuses. During the extra turn, all their non-attacking abilities cost -1 AP. This is also a very big deal for our game plan. As I mentioned, we get the first round, or the first turn, we will buff people as much as possible, we bring it down to somebody, and by having, okay, so when we get our heroic act, we get to buff somebody else, and all the things they do that are non-attacking will cost 1 less. So we are just powering more and more our first turns in combat. It's gonna be very, very good to get the ball rolling. That snowball effect I talked about. Very, very good upgrade. Awareness, Fellowship. I take Fellowship here because I cannot take Willpower. Fellowship is what's important for the officer, so it made sense as my second characteristic. Seize the Initiative. This was very, very strong. It got nerfed. Again, the officers have been nerfed all over the place. The officer and their allies with the Voice of Command effect deal an additional 19% damage to enemies that had not yet acted this combat. So this can still work for my game plan, because again, if we want to kill everything before they act, that means we're going to benefit from this extra damage. But what this did before was, Seize the Initiative would guarantee that your officers would always act first in combat also. So, again, manipulating the initiative, we could play first. I would also have my main character playing first, just giving more Bring It Down, more heroic acts, more Finest Hours. Currently, I would say that this feat here might not be worth picking up. It's cool to have the extra damage, but it needs to be before enemies act. It needs to have the Voice of Command effect. I just think that this is no longer worth taking, honestly. I would not pick this right now. Maybe later if I don't have any more choices, but at this stage in the game, it's very important what you pick. I would not pick this. Fellowship again, because we cannot have willpower. Air of Authority, very important. The officer increases the allies' resolve by 6 until the end of combat. If the target is under the effect of Voice of Command, they will start their next turn with +1 additional action point. Again, action economy, more action points. Increasing resolve, very important. Resolve influences how efficiently and for how long characters can fight in the battle. It determines the amount of momentum gained at the beginning of each turn or after killing an enemy. So, again, we want to generate a lot of momentum. Resolve is one of the best ways of doing that. So, the more resolve we have, the better for us. Very, very good to have this. Mastery of Time. Whenever an ally in combat gains an extra turn, the Navigator gains a stacking +5 bonus to willpower until the end of combat. Stacks up to 5 times. I don't remember if this had a maximum stack before. This might have been endless, so I'm guessing it's another nerf. It's still quite good to have +25 willpower. So 5 extra turns. I think in 5 extra turns, your combat is over, so it's not that much of a big deal having the maximum here, this cap. Still worth taking. Inspiring Speech. Air of Authority immediately grants momentum to target equal to target's resolve. More momentum generation. Lord Imperium. Perception. We also get some very powerful abilities that work with Perception. We want to have Perception, I think, if we can get Perception up to 100, we have some very, very good things that we can use. It also benefits some of the Navigator talents. That's why I'm picking it here. I could also not pick Willpower, otherwise I would have. Ebb and Flow. Every even turn, second, fourth, etc., the Navigator gains an additional action point. Action economy. Every odd turn, the Navigator gains +20 Perception. We want action points, we want Perception. This gives us a nice boost. And then finally, Finest Hour Upgrade 2. The target of Finest Hour gets more bonuses. All negative effects are immediately removed from the target. Until the end of the officer's next turn, the target cannot die. So this is a defensive upgrade to Finest Hour. I went for this one because, again, when I was playing with my officer, I wasn't really into that game plan of just trying to kill everybody on the first round, even though I did want more momentum for my heroic acts. So I decided that a defensive ability would be a good choice, and I still think it is, because there might be times where you might not be able to assemble your combo pieces and kill everything in the first turn. So having some kind of fallback plan and be able to heal your allies and help your allies is a good thing. So on the officer side, this is what we took. So as you can see, it's mostly support abilities. And then we move for the Grand Strategist. The most important part about the Grand Strategist is combat tactics. You can even ignore the most of this text. What matters here the most is this line. Regardless of abilities used, the Grand Strategist always acts first in combat. This is one of the more powerful effects in the game, as I have mentioned already before. Very, very good. Not only that, we also get some combat tactic areas that we can apply on the floor, which can benefit our party. So again, support. You will notice as well that on pretty much all of my level ups, I am taking nothing from the Grand Strategist. That's because on my analysis of this archetype, at least at the time, Grand Strategist did not really offer me a lot that I would consider very important, especially not when compared to the Navigator side of things. So most of my picks during my Grand Strategist archetype time, or my level ups in here, are mostly, or if not all, when possible, on Navigator abilities. Because the Navigator abilities are where the true power of Cassia lies. So let's look at what we have. Combat tactics at rank 1. At rank 2, we pick up one of the most fun aspects of the game, one of the more fun abilities and also very powerful, Notch of Purpose. The Navigator designates a square. The enemy closest to that square immediately moves up to 4 cells toward it. If multiple enemies are the same distance from that point, all of them move. The targets move even if they are stunned or immobilized. Some things that are worth mentioning here that is very, very important. You can couple this up with certain abilities that also deal damage when you forcefully move opponents. So not only are you manipulating their movement, you are also hurting the enemies. And something very important is you can take an enemy out of cover, because sometimes you cannot hit an enemy because of the cover they have. This will just take them out of cover into the open, and then you can just shoot them up and kill them very quickly. Or you can even do something like bring an enemy into melee range of a melee character, so they cannot shoot their weapons, or they are forced to flee and trigger attacks of opportunity, which is very, very nice. It's just free damage overall. And Notch of Purpose is also a prerequisite for something we pick up later, which is Point of Curiosity. I will go into that in a second. So, very fun ability, very useful ability, a lot of creative uses of this. It is very, very good and very, very versatile. Next up, Improvised Strategy. At the start of combat, the Grand Strategist gains one random unknown stratagem and can use it until the end of combat for 0 AP. I think this was something fun to pick, and I did not regret it, because since I'm not taking pretty much anything from the Grand Strategist, this will let me play with some of the things that this archetype is able to do at 0 cost and only by spending 1 feat. So I took it, tried it out, and I actually liked it. It gives us some free stuff to use for the entire combat. It can be quite good. Take and Hold. This is the heroic act from the Grand Strategist. I don't think I ever even used this. You can choose one combat tactics area. Every ally inside that area gains an extra turn with 1 AP and 2 MP to start the Grand Strategist next turn. For every enemy that's killed in the selected combat area, this AP is increased by 1 up to a maximum of 3 and MP by 2 up to a maximum of 6. I guess that thinking about this a little bit, if you are able to, just start the combat and manipulate the initiative and everybody is clumped up and can act first, I guess it can be a very powerful thing. I didn't end up using it because more often than not, I had my party scattered. I had like my tank in front, I would have my backline in the back, one officer on one side, the other officer on the other side. So we could not really benefit from this too much, so I didn't really end up using it. Overall, I would prefer the Finest Hour Heroic Act, because you can only pick one. You can only use one Heroic Act unless there are specific circumstances, like like from the Arch-Militant, there's a feat for this, or an upgrade for the Heroic Act. But by default, you can only use one Heroic Act per combat, and you get to choose from your first archetype or from your second archetype. You cannot choose both. So I think the Officer one is more powerful on a generic approach, I guess. Or in the general case. We get AP increase, awesome. More willpower. Perilous Ways. Now that we have Notch of Purpose and Point of Curiosity soon, this becomes very good. Enemies moved by the Navigator's power suffer 7 damage at the end of movement. This damage is increased by 1 for every cell the enemy moves. This is based on willpower again, so the more you scale willpower, the more damage this will do. This was actually nerfed before the final release of the game, because in the early access, you would just murder everything with Notch of Purpose and Point of Curiosity. It is still very good to take, deals very significant damage, very, very nice. More willpower, rank 7, Point of Curiosity. So, if Notch of Purpose was excellent, this one is superb. All enemies in a 6-cell radius around the target point must pass a willpower resistance test or immediately move 3 cells toward that point. The targets move if they are standard mobilized. So, Notch of Purpose affects one enemy or more if they are at the same exact distance. Point of Curiosity will move everybody in the area. So again, you can just imagine. You get to take people out of cover, you get to clump them up to then burst them down or AoE them down with Idira or even with Cassia with your eye spell. Do a lot of damage to everybody, stun everybody. Man, this is just... Manipulating movement is one of the best things you can do, especially in a turn-based game. As a side note, if you've played Divinity Original Sin, especially the second one, you will know, hopefully, how powerful the teleport spell is for this exact reason. You manipulate the movement of the enemies. You manipulate their positioning in the battlefield. Very good. Awareness for skill checks. Tonicity. Navigator powers deal 1 additional damage for every 5 bonus characteristic of the Navigator's currently equipped staff. Castigating, infusing, and devastating count as characteristics for this talent. So, you get staffs. We're going to look at those when we go into our items. They will just make our spells better. Fellowship, because I could not have willpower. Blood Augury on rank 9. Enemies damaged by the Navigator suffer plus 15% additional damage from any source of warp damage. If you have characters capable of dealing a lot of warp damage, this will be very good. Cassia deals a lot of warp damage. Idira can deal stupid amounts of warp damage. And so, if you increase stupid amounts of damage by a percentage, it is very powerful. It also stacks up to 5 times. Open to the Warp. Enemies affected by the Navigator's power suffer a stacking 10 penalty to the next recent test from the Navigator's powers. The penalty is lost after such test is made. This one isn't as relevant, but you are debuffing them for your next disabling effect. So, you affect somebody with one of your powers, and then you use your Eye Stare to stun them. This will make the stun go through a lot more often, because it will lower their saving throws, their resistance tests. Rank 11, Fellowship, Awareness. Taken Hold, Upgrade 3, not very important, never used it. All allies in the selected area also gain 20% dodge and armor penetration. That's cool. Stable Routes. Whenever the Navigator uses a Navigator power, Veil Degradation is reduced by -1. So, the other aspect in this game that's unique is Veil Degradation. When Psychers use their psychic powers, such as Idira, you will start increasing the Veil Degradation. The more Veil Degradation there is, the more likely you are that when you are casting a spell, you will trigger a potentially very negative effect for your party. So, I ended up at a point where I'm casting a lot of spells per turn with Idira. It's a very important aspect of our game plan as well. We'll get into that later on Idira. But we do cast a lot of spells with her per turn. And it was becoming very, very common that I would get into the danger levels of Veil Degradation very, very quickly. So having a way to reduce that is going to help out in just overall staying safe. So I took this as a kind of a preventive measure at what was happening at that point in the game to not kill myself too often. Perception, Lord Imperium, Waking Nightmare. This is also, like, this is insane in my opinion. All enemies within the area of effect suffer a 34, this is based on willpower, you can increase this, a 34 penalty to their willpower and toughness until the end of combat. Now, this might seem just like a regular debuff, but what you have to think about this here is that you negate a large chunk of these two stats. By lowering willpower and toughness, you are lowering their resistance tests on willpower and toughness. And also, very importantly, when you reduce toughness, you are effectively reducing their maximum amount of hit points. So, just by casting Waking Nightmare, you are removing a large chunk of wounds or hit points from every enemy hit. And, let's note, there is no saving throw for this. There is no resistance test for this. It lasts until the end of combat. It's amazing. This is amazing. You use this on a boss, you will see their HP drop by thousands. It is very, very good. Especially if you cast this before trying to affect them with something else, like Point of Curiosity or Eye Stare or whatnot. You lower their resistance tests, you will just make them fail a lot more often by that. And then the Sea of Souls. While under the effect of any Navigator power, enemies have their armor reduced by 23. This reduction is increased by the devastating parameter of the Navigator staff, but does not stack. So, reducing the armor of enemies, I guess there's nothing to say here, it's very useful, so we take it. Pass Unscathed. If the Navigator's perception is higher than their agility, their dodge is calculated using perception instead. So, if you noticed, my agility is quite low, but my perception is at 100. Our dodge is 178%. So, for somebody to hit Cassia from range, it is not easy. So, very good choice as well for this level. Where was I? I was... Damn it. I was here. Okay, so very good as well. Lord Imperium, more perception, especially for something like this. Intelligence, I think, because I didn't have anything else to choose from. Or sometimes I like to round out my ability scores here. Oh, God damn it. I hate that it does this. Let me go back. Okay. Strange Vitality. The Navigator heals 12 wounds at the beginning of every turn and gains 1 additional wound for every Navigator talent taken. And we do take a lot of those. So, again, you can see my HP is very high. The healing increases by 1 for every creature killed in between Navigator's turns. So, it's just a very good defensive thing to take. You just get more and more wound buffer. You will go down a lot less frequently. Very, very nice. Unnatural Allure at rank 19. The Navigator gains plus 5 fellowship and an additional 1 fellowship for every Navigator talent or Navigator power taken. So, we're starting to take talents that scale with Navigator talents picked. So at this point, we have the ones we chose on the Officer archetype. We have the ones from the Grand Strategist. We have a lot at this point. And this will just benefit us very, very greatly right now, because it's already scaled up quite well. And it will continue to scale as you get more levels or more abilities in Navigator talents, by the way. Taken Hold, upgrade 4. You increase the number of action points granted to 5, which is actually very, very nice. God damn, that's a lot. And finally, going into the Exemplar. The Exemplar is common to everybody. You just get to pick whatever you feel is best. So you can still see that I'm picking a lot of Navigator things here. Rank 1, Eager for Battle. During the first turn of combat, the character has plus 2 additional action points. This is also crucial for our game plan. Cassia is our Grand Strategist. She is the one that acts first. She is the one that sets up the entire combo from the beginning. So the more action points she has at the start, the more buffs she can throw out, the more abilities she can use. So just a nice, very nice buff and boost to that starting plan. Eye of Oblivion. Every enemy Navigator has in their line of sight has its dodge and hit chance reduced by 10. Just awesome passive debuff. Awareness, under my protection, allies that are targeted by the Navigator's abilities gain 5 to all resistance tests against warp effects. This one is not as interesting, but once you get into the exemplar side of things, you don't have a lot else to pick. But it is a Navigator power, so it will scale up the abilities we picked before that scale with Navigator talents taken. So, nice choice as well. More willpower, it will not die, just more wounds make us safer. Warp Curse Unleashed, another amazing debuff. The enemy becomes cursed until the end of combat. Again, there is no saving throw for this, there is no resistance test here. Curse. All incoming warp damage is increased by 34%, scaling with willpower, and other types of incoming damage are increased by 17%, again scaling with willpower. At the start of their turn, the enemy closest to them also becomes cursed. So this is a no resistance allowed, guaranteed debuff on an enemy that will greatly increase damage that Cassia does, as well as Idira, by quite a lot, and also the rest of your party. It's amazing. You start, when you get some levels and items, you start dealing stupid amounts of damage in this game. So anything that scales in a percentage is just going to give you insane amounts of bonuses. So this is very, very powerful. More awareness. Combat meditation, you get 15 willpower as long as they have no ranged weapons equipped. Staves do not count as ranged weapons. We are not shooting, we don't need ranged weapons, so this is just a passive 15 extra willpower. Awesome. Veil of Protection. Allies that are targeted by Navigator's power gain plus 10% armor, so just more armor. This additional armor is reduced by the amount of Veil degradation, sure, which kind of sucks, but again, a bit of armor, it's an additional Navigator talent, why not take it here? More willpower, focus. This is from the officer. Whenever the officer uses an ability on an ally, that ally gains a bonus to their perception and ballistic skill equal to 6. These bonuses stack, but half of them are lost at the end of target's turn. So we can buff a single ally quite a lot of times in a single turn. So this can give them a significant amount of buffs. Why not take it? Again, at this point you're just picking minor bonuses. Mend Reality, I did end up liking this one quite a bit. As I said, we were casting a lot of spells with Idira per turn, more to the end of the game, and I was kind of reaching the critical level of Veil degradation every single turn. And what Mend Reality does is, the Navigator decreases Veil degradation by minus willpower bonus points. We have a lot of willpower, so just by using this once, you can basically reset your Veil degradation. Very, very nice, very, very handy. It's not a critical talent to get, but it is quite helpful. Besides that, all allies also gain a willpower bonus deflection against all warp damage and damage from psychic powers until the end of the Navigator's next turn. Just added bonus. More perception. Threads and faults. Whenever the enemy fails resistance tests against Navigator's power, attacks against them gain 40% critical hit chance. This effect stacks but is reset by critical hit. The fact that it is reset makes this talent kind of poor, but it's, again, just another Navigator talent to stack up or to scale up the ones that scale with Navigator talents taken. Swift movements, action economy, more movement points. Lord Imperium, eager subordinates. When allies take actions on extra turns given by the character, they deal 15% more damage. Again, very nice to have for our game plan. We want to kill everything early, and everything is going to be done basically during extra turns, be it by Bring It Down or by Finest Hour. So just increasing the damage by a percentage is going to be a good thing to have. AP increase on level 10. Still Resolve on rank 11. You get your Resolve increased by 3. Resolve increases momentum. Resolve also benefits some of the abilities from the officer, so just overall nice thing to have. Medicae, because why not? Commanding Voice. This could have been taken very, very early. Probably instead of Seize the Initiative, for example. The range of the officer's abilities increased by 3. The range of Voice of Commands increased by 6. Just a quality of life feature. You can apply your buffs from further away. Lord Imperium, Sniping Zone. I had to pick something from the Grand Strategist. I took this one. Each ally in the rear area gains 9% critical hit chance if there are no enemies in a 5-cell radius around the ally. I would typically put this on, for example, Iliad or Argenta. It just increases their damage by a bit. Not that important. More Fellowship, Lord Imperium. Firebrand. If an extra turn given by the character's abilities or talents grants MP, the target gains plus 4 additional MP. If AP, the target gains 1 additional AP. Action Economy, once again, this is one of the exemplar specific abilities. Very, very good. Iron Discipline. Allies affected by the officer's abilities gain a bonus to all resistance tests equal to 24. Defensive buff for everybody. Strategic Offense. Every enemy killed in the frontline area increases all bonuses of combat areas. This is not very important, but sure, why not? More Medicae. Be Vigilant. Allies under the effect of the officer's abilities gain a bonus to their weapon skill equal to 12, and they will deal plus 9 more damage on attacks of opportunity until the start of the officer's turn. Again, not very important, but not bad either. And finally, Nimble. 10% extra bonus dodge, just making it even harder to hit. So, we went through all of our level ups. I ended the game because this is basically a save at the end of the game. I stopped at rank 17. I actually got rank 18 right before the final boss, but you know, and this save is before, so I'm showing what I have here. And I didn't even level up at that point because the game just ends. Let's look at the items we have. So, or actually characteristics. So first of all, we are at level 52. We have 227 hit points, and this is how we get them. We have plus 17 from Sustained Vitality. We have plus 26 from It Will Not Die. We have plus 100 from our willpower, because we basically use willpower instead of toughness for the will points. For the will points. For the wounds. And base value plus 84. Quite a bit. Characteristics, like I mentioned, none of this top part here matters. We're basically only wanting perception, willpower, and fellowship. Fellowship affecting our officer abilities, willpower affecting our navigator abilities, which is the most important one in my opinion, and then perception also benefits from several talents, and especially some navigator talents as well, like for example, getting our dodge from perception instead of agility. As you can also see, our dodge is very, very high. We get an additional 100% just from perception. Like I said, I'm not going to go into the skill checks. You can pick whatever you want. I picked Lord Imperium here, Commerce, Coercion, because this is based on Fellowship, which she has quite a bit. And then Awareness, because this is based on Perception also. As for our items, Cassia doesn't need a lot of items to work very well. The more important ones are the staves. So I'm going to leave those for the end, actually. I gave her the Tiara of the Immaterium. The wearer gains 10 willpower and suffers 50% less warp damage. More willpower, definitely something you want. Armor didn't matter, just something that's light that gives you dodge. Theodora's Rosary, 10 bonus to Commerce and Lore. This is just to pass skill checks. Medal of Alacrity. When the wearer targets an ally with the Bring It Down ability for the first time in combat, that ally gains plus 1 additional action point. It is only for the first time in combat, but like I said, the game plan is kill everything as quickly as possible. So the more buffs we can get for that plan, the better it is. So very important also for the start. Shadow Field. At the beginning of the combat, the wearer gains a Shadow Field effect. While under this effect, the wearer counts as being in full cover against all range attacks. The effect is lost when the wearer is hit by a range attack and suffers damage from it. So, what this means is, we have a high amount of dodge already, and this will also make us be under the effect of full cover. So, if you have a very high amount of dodge, and you are in full cover, it's gonna be very, very hard for an enemy to actually hit you. And this means I can walk around the battlefield, buffing people, giving them extra turns, tossing out spells on the enemies, without having to worry too much if I'm actually behind cover or not. I can be in the open, and I am still very, very well protected. Tries Pioneer's Bracers. Every time the wearer deals damage, a target's weapon skill and ballistic skill is reduced by 5 for 2 rounds, stacks up to 6 times. You could give this to a number of characters. I gave it to her. We can do a lot of damage with Cassia because, again, we can use Notch of Purpose, we can use Point of Curiosity, we can use Eye Glare. All of those things are going to be dealing damage on a single turn, which means we can stack this quite rapidly, in an AoE as well. So it is a good item to have. The Chameleon Cloak, this just gives us extra 10% dodge. And finally, Expeditionary Footwear. Whenever the wearer uses Navigator power, they gain 15% dodge until the end of the round and stacks. So, so you can see how this works, right? Baseline, we have a very high amount of dodge. We are always under full cover, and every single time we use a Navigator power, we get a stacking buff of 15% per cast to our dodge, and we get to act first in every single combat. Cassia will not be shot, ever. Nobody will hit her, on unfair. Then, I typically just have something here that I never use grenades. I think I used them like once or twice, but for the most part I didn't end up using them. I just give her some medkits in case we want to help out our party members. It can be very handy. Everybody that can have medikits equipped, make sure you have them. It will save your life in certain situations. Very good to have. Now, for the main items for her. The staves. The Astronomican Regalia. Forget about the damage, we don't care about this. We are never gonna hit anybody with our staff. Whenever allies become targets of a Navigator power that has not targeted them this combat, they gain 1 additional AP on their next turn. Again, action economy, boosting that snowball at the start of the combat. Very awesome. Infusing 10. Allies targeted by Navigator powers gain a plus 10 bonus to all their characteristics until the end of the Navigator's next turn. This bonus stacks and is prolonged till Navigator's next turn every time it stacks. Dude, it's just more buffing. It's just more stacking of characteristics. It's amazing. Devastating. 6. I don't really care about this. The value, I mean. Devastating is good though. The first use of an attacking Navigator power per turn does not set the power on cooldown and does not count to attack limit per turn. This is broken. Okay? Especially earlier on when you rely on Cassia's Eye Glare to kill people and stun them. This is amazing. The second use of this power or the use of a different attacking Navigator's power on the same turn deals an additional 6 damage to all targets and 6 direct damage to Navigator. It doesn't really matter. It's more damage, sure, that you deal and that you take. The one you take, we don't care about. It's very low. And the one you deal helps, but it's not that important. You are going to be dealing so much damage that 6 is not going to make too much of a difference. And even if you don't kill them, it doesn't matter too much. Because the main purpose of Cassia is to mess up your opponents. Change their movement, change their position, disable them, debuff them, stun them. If you can injure them, all the better. But if you don't kill them with Cassia, it's not that important. We have other characters for that purpose. It also gives us plus 15 to willpower and plus 20 to perception. So everything we want is right here in this stuff. I think you can purchase this one from one of the merchants. And then we also have the red crystal staff. This one is also pretty cool. The first attacking Navigator power each turn costs 1 less AP. More action economy. Very, very good. It also has devastating 12. So you get to attack twice per turn. Your second one will deal more damage. Very useful. And I think it deals direct damage. It's just saying that this damage cannot be reduced. It also gives us plus 15 willpower and plus 10 perception. You can even swap between staves to get the most benefit out of them while you play. But for the most part, I just put this on and I never change it again. This one with infusing is gonna buff everybody a lot better, so I just stick with this one. It's a very, very good staff. It makes a big difference because everything you do is better. Every time you buff an ally, you buff for more. If you buff an ally, you give them more action points. You get 2 attacks per turn. You don't get a cooldown on your powers there. you get more willpower. It's perfect. This is the item to get as a weapon for Cassia, in my opinion. So yeah, a lot of the items are good to have, but I would say the critical one is gonna be the stuff. Just get the best stuff you can get. And then for defensive purposes, Shadow Field is amazing. The Expeditionary Footwear is amazing. And then Medal of Alacrity just to get more action points for our allies. This will finish up this video for Cassia, and we also discussed a role and also the game plan for our strategy as a party on combat encounters. The next videos will focus on the remainder of our characters. With that said, my friends, I'm gonna finish this one up. As always, if you have any questions, any suggestions, leave a comment below. Anything you want to know about Cassia, how I built her, anything like that, feel free to ask. If you are enjoying this content, consider subscribing for more. It is a free and easy way to support the channel. Many more videos are coming to the channel as well, and I hope to see you all in some other video. Until then, stay safe everyone.